Well, good morning, Shawnee family. I hope that you're having a good morning in God's Word. In those verses that you just read in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus is continuing his ministry and he's now teaching in parables, using stories to teach truth. And he starts with the parable of the sower and shows us that God's Word accomplishes a different outcome based on the different types of hearts or different soil types, the different hearts of the hearers that receive God's Word. And then at the end of the verses you read, Jesus tells a couple more stories that God accomplishes his purposes in almost imperceptible ways, just like when a farmer sows a seed and then unbeknownst to him, it grows, it sprouts until there's a harvest, and even compared to the small size of the seed that the farmer plants, it can grow into a very, very large plant, just like a mustard seed and the mustard tree that grows very, very large. So God's purposes accomplish great things even in almost imperceptible ways. What is Jesus teaching in this? We're going to wait till next week when we unpack all the details of what this means, but suffice it to say that Jesus is helping his listeners understand, number one, how important and valuable God's Word is and how God uses that to accomplish his purposes, even if it's almost imperceptible, and certainly in dramatic ways, God accomplishes magnificent things through his Word. Jesus is showing us how valuable his Word is. I want to focus for just our time together this morning on just a few verses right in the middle. With that in mind about how valuable God's Word, I want to read again the 4 verses from verse 21 to 25. Jesus says, "And he said to them, 'Is a lamp brought in to be put under a basket or under a bed and not on a stand? For nothing is hidden except to be made manifest, nor is anything secret except to come to light. If anyone has ears to hear, let him hear.' And he said to them, 'Pay attention to what you hear. With the measure you use it, it will be measured to you, and still more will be added to you. For to the one who has, more will be given, and from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away.'" What is Jesus talking about with this light being put on a stand and not under a bed? With the idea that the more you have, even more will be given to you, and the one who doesn't have, what he does have will be taken away. Remember, Jesus is talking about his Word and how it accomplishes his purposes. There's actually a couple of illustrations that this little book, we've been encouraging some of you to go through, whether on your own or with your kids, but Chris Morphew uses a couple illustrations on these 4 verses that are very, very helpful, and so I'm just going to reuse them. But could you imagine being in a power outage? Your house is completely dark. In our house, we keep our flashlights in a drawer in the kitchen. So imagine if I went to that drawer and I got my flashlight and I turned it on because it was dark, and then I put it back in the drawer and I shut the drawer and I'm standing there in the dark. Who would do that? You use flashlights when it's dark to make everything seen. That's what Jesus is saying. You don't light a lamp and put it under a bed or hide it under a basket. When you light it, it goes on a table so that everyone can see everything. God is using his Word, and Jesus has come to declare the Word so that people would see and they would know and they would hear. And the thing about God's Word is that those who receive it and understand it and know it will get even more of it. There'll be more insight, more understanding. That's what the second part of what those verses mean. Think of it this way. Do you have a friend that the more time you spend with that friend, the more you invest in that relationship, the friendship grows better and better? That's the way it works with our friends. The more we invest, the more we get out of it. In a similar way, when we don't talk with our friends, when we don't spend time with them, the friendship begins to wane a little bit. Jesus is wanting his hearers and listeners to understand that the more they invest in their own learning of God's Word, when they see it as valuable, God's giving it so that everything would be known and seen. And the more of God's Word that they know and see and understand, the more of it will just keep multiplying in that way. And in the same way, when they neglect what the revelation that they've been given, then they're going to understand less and less. as you talk about this, whether you're by yourself and you think about it or write out your answers, or if you're with family and you discuss through some of these things, we sent out some questions to you in the email. And I want you to think about what are the things in your life that you love, that you value, that you want to gain benefit from. And what are the things you do in your life so that you get more of them? If in a similar way, then think about not just those things in your lives, but think about the patterns and habits of your life. Does it reflect the fact that you think God's word is valuable and that you've structured your life such that you want to get more out of it? We look forward to being able to go through this passage in detail next week and to see more of what's there, but spend a little time just discussing, do you think God's word is valuable, and have you structured your life such that you're able to get more out of it? There's many people who go through life discouraged because they're not learning from God's word, but it's partly because they haven't structured their life in order to get benefit out of God's word. Is this book most important to you, and learning from it so that you might receive more out of it? That's Christ's desire for us. Church, we look forward to being able to gather again next week. Enjoy the time thinking through this, writing out your answers, or just discussing it with your family, and we'll see you next week.